But I want to share this with you this morning, this reality that a marriage without communication is like a car without gas. It may look good, but it won't go anywhere. Friends, today we're leaning into this reality of communication. See, there are all these things that we talk about. I mean, we see them posted right online, or we talk about them perhaps in premarital counseling, these core issues, right, that impact every married couple, right? Money, faith, intimacy, family of origin, and upbringing, and parenting. All these things kind of really, fall into all these kind of things that have to be fleshed out and talked about. But you see, in that very thing, it has to be talked about. I mean, for any of the big things of when two people say I do to each other, for them to kind of figure it all out, they have to communicate. And learning to communicate well, right, in your relationship will help it take off like a rocket, right, soaring into outer space, seeing all the beautiful sights and the beautiful galaxy and the stars. But on the flip side, failure to communicate well, it's like a car without gas. You're not really going to go many places. Actually, perhaps, one of two things might happen. You'll live and put up with each other for a long, long time, and there'll be resentment that builds and frustration. Perhaps you've seen this happen. Or perhaps people will call it quits, and everybody gets hurt. I mean, there's still everyone getting hurt, but people call it quits, and frankly, no one leaves a marriage without wounds. But friends, what I hope that we could really discover and lean in together this morning is this reality that our ability to communicate well in our marriage will determine the level of joy we share with our spouse. You see, even on this very thing of communicating, perhaps we're in a season of life where we're newly married, or we've been married since the dinosaurs were here. Maybe we're dating or we're engaged. Maybe we're single or separated, whatever it might be. I hope that this morning as we just press into this, that God can do a great work and some healing and some great sense of direction. Because, I mean, like I mentioned last Sunday, that our goal for this series for 4 weeks is not just to have all this more content about marriage, because frankly we can watch YouTube videos and TikToks and read books and podcasts, and those are all great and well and absolutely in our conversations. I mean, even today there'll be some practicality of communication that will be fleshed out, but man, my hope for us this morning is that we can really spend time in Scripture and let God mold how we use our words with our spouse and how we listen to our spouse. Perhaps God can again begin to do this change from the inside out in our life. The Bible itself is called the Word because it's God's mean of communicating to us. The truth is that it's the voice of the one who made the universe. It is alive and active and ready to pierce the hearts of those who read it with hunger. And this morning, on this topic of communicating, we're going to spend time actually reading through the book of Proverbs. What's fascinating is that in the Old Testament, there's this book called Proverbs that holds all of this kind of divine, heavenly, wisdom, this great wisdom, for humanity. And there's a lot of things that it talks about. But what's fascinating is that if you were to look at where all of the verses in Scripture, where most of them are written that talk about communicating, most of them are in Proverbs. A huge majority of all the verses in the entire Bible that speak about communicating fall in Proverbs. 915 verses are in the book of Proverbs, and well over a tenth of them are just on the topic of speaking to one another and listening to each other. It is one of the largest focuses of the entire book. And my hope this morning is we're actually going to spend time in 5 different verses or different sections of Proverbs. And my hope this morning is that each time we can discover God's wisdom for healthy and wholesome communication for an awesome marriage. Wouldn't that be great, friends? Does this sound like fun? Right? It's okay to lie to me. It's all right. Yes, it sounds like fun, right? Absolutely. Hey, I know we're tired. I know it's that time of the year when this stuff happens with time change and whatnot, but perhaps, man, we can really allow God to do something fresh in us, and I encourage that for you this morning. But hey, the first one I want us to spend time in is actually Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13. It says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. Half the battle of learning to communicate well with our spouse is learning how to listen well to our spouse. And what I hope we can gather from this is that healthy communication in our marriage requires skillful listening. I mean, again, it is half the battle of listening. Because if one is speaking and the other one is not listening, well, then nothing is being done. The car has no gas. It's not moving at all. You see, actually, among humanity, there's these three kind of types of listening that we do. There's informational listening, there's critical listening, and there's empathetic listening. Informational is kind of like where we're listening and we're studying. Like someone's telling you about something, and you're not really looking to respond. You're not looking to, you're not really looking to provide a solution. You're studying. You're wanting to learn. Hey, how was your day? Oh, tell me more about this. Or who is that person again? Like you're putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. Critical listening is where we're listening to solve a problem, where we're listening to help create a solution, or we hear struggle or strife and we want to help. We want to help a friend or someone we care about. We're listening to give a response to some sort of advice or counsel. And then there's empathetic listening, where we're listening not to fix anything. Man, we're probably listening, and we probably won't even be able to understand much of what's being shared, right, in empathetic listening. But it's this moment where we get to reciprocate emotions and feelings to help someone we care about feel seen and heard in what they're going through. See, I played that clip for us because it's this reality of what many of us experience in our relationship. Oh, because God designed men and women so differently. And, statistically speaking, ladies, us guys, we prefer that you listen to us using the informational type of listening, even though if we're talking about things that bore you to death, or even you can't stand listening about, or we're using these words and technology systems or things on the job site or car parts, and you're just like, you lost me like way back there. But we feel appreciated when you're like, hey, tell me more about that. Tell me more, because it makes us feel like we know our stuff, and it makes us feel like we're pretty important. Like, yeah, I'd love to share some of this with you. And gentlemen, it's no surprise that our women, our ladies, they prefer from us a different type of listening. One that's empathetic, that reciprocates this emotion and feeling that it's not about the nail. But we find ourselves often in this constant state of misunderstanding and frustration, don't we? If we don't do the hard work of interpreting and understanding what kind of listening is needed for the moment, what our spouse is looking for us in that moment, man, we'll miss it. We should start with informational and then move on to empathetic, and then perhaps if the moment merits it, if there seems to be a need for help with something, then we can provide some critical listening. But friends, how often do we find ourselves sharing with the person we care so much about, whether it be text or it be through a phone call, or we're sitting down having coffee together, whatever it may be, and we share something and we feel like it did not sink in the way we hoped it would. Hurts. But this listening journey, this healthy communication, well, half the battle is developing this skillful listening. Proverbs number 2, the second one that I want us to lean into is Proverbs chapter 15, verse 4, and it says this: the soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. The word here for soothing tongue refers to gentleness, a gentle voice that brings about life. But on the flip side, there's this perverse tongue. There's this harsh speaking that brings about death and frustration and pain and sorrow. And what I hope we can gather from this moment, from that text, is that we can either be harsh or we can be gentle when we speak, but only one of those will give us the marriage that we want. Our irritability towards our spouse is causing some damage, frustrations. Understand that gentleness is not weakness. Gentleness is not being weak. Gentleness is actually, it's not rolling over. It's not being walked over. Gentleness is strength under control. That's what it means to be gentle, to be strong under control. Friends, we have to come to this reality that the way we speak, harsh or gentle, they bring about two different outcomes. We all grew up learning the same little song. Maybe perhaps you could finish it. That sticks and stones may break my bones, but man, we found out pretty fast that that's not very true, is it? I'll never forget riding to school one morning. My mom is singing that over us over and over and over again. And I couldn't help but think, man, what that kid said to me, though, from yesterday, it still hurts, Bob. It still hurts. I mean, think for a moment. Think just for a moment right now of the nicest thing someone's ever said to you. Think of the nicest thing someone has ever said to you. Just let us sit there for a moment. Now, think of the meanest thing that someone has said to you. You thought of it pretty fast, didn't you? When you thought of the nice thing, you thought of it, it didn't really touch your heart. It didn't give you this boost. But when you thought of the mean thing, wow, you felt the weight again. You felt the pain again, even just right now in the room. And unfortunately, sometimes the meanest things that are ever said to us come from people we love. And this verse uses the imagery of a tree that is growing and flourishing to reveal what happens when we speak with gentleness to one another. We can say hard things. Understand this. We can say pretty hard, straightforward things with a gentle voice. We can share in disagreements. We can point out flaws or mistakes with gentleness. That doesn't mean, again, that we turn the other way or we sweep things under the rug. Gentleness is just speaking to the tone and the posture that we have in those moments of communicating. If our speech is harsh, then all it does is deliver the same message but with a sledgehammer, and all it does is create an even bigger mess. Sledgehammers destroy. Where on the flip side, with a gentle voice, we are building and growing and making beautiful again. Even in Galatians chapter 5, as we read about the fruits of the Spirit, gentleness is one of them. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness. If it's our desire to grow in our following of Jesus, then we must aim to live by the Spirit. Because imagine a life, imagine speaking with gentleness to one another, and imagine what could grow from that. The third proverb of wisdom in healthy and wholesome communication that is shared is Proverbs chapter 17, verse 27. It says this: the one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. Restraint is the exercise of wisdom. It is the use of wisdom with our words. And friends, hope what we can kind of see together is that not every thought should be said. There's actually more value in withholding the wrong words than in saying the right ones. We want to be people who say the right words all the time. We want to be people who say the right words, but we have to come to this reality that there's more power, there's more value, there's more meaningfulness in our friendship, relationship, marriage, whatever it is, if we actually can withhold the wrong words better than being worried about the right things to say. You know, husbands, there's this reality, right? There's something that we think about with our spouse pretty often, right? I mean, we think about how beautiful our wife is, and our mind just keeps going and going. And maybe in the first 5 years of marriage, you know, there's these things that we kind of do, right? There's, you know, your wife comes home and tells you that she just learned something that just rocked her world, and you want to say it, don't you? There's this, in those first few years of being newly married, there's that thought that you just want to say right now, and no one's laughing, right? No one's like, do we not want to admit what's happening, right, in the privacy of our conversations between us husbands and our wives? But this is we have these moments of wanting to say things out loud, but maybe not every chance we should say something about what will happen later, right? Got to pick our moments. But understand that there's need for restraint in the way that we speak to one another. These thoughts that pop so quick into our mind, maybe a joke that goes too far, a poke at our spouse's flaws or insecurities, that we just try to be funny but really hurt them. Or perhaps we got so angry where we just went off and we said things we didn't mean. We were just angry and we want to say sorry. We want to take it back, but words only move in one direction. They can't throw them into reverse and back up. They only move forward. This verse speaks about those who have knowledge will use words with restraint. Friends, make it your desire to grow and mature in the wisdom of how you speak. Another fruit of the Spirit is self-control. I stopped one short earlier. Perhaps those of you who caught me. Because the last fruit of the Spirit of living with God and allowing His Spirit to lead you in your everyday life is embracing and being matured in a sense of self-control. This is something that we cannot put off, because if we do, we will only become someone who takes things too far and will hurt those we love. The fourth proverb that perhaps speaks to, frankly, a lot of the healthiness that we can really begin to experience in our relationship is Proverbs verse 12, 19 through 20. And it says this, it says, truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment. Deceit is in the hearts of those who plot evil, but those who promote peace have joy. Those who promote peace have joy. Friends, what I believe God is hoping for us to understand is that truthfulness is how we build deeper trust, lifelong peace in our marriage. There are entire books on the importance of honesty and truthfulness in our relationships, and how when we try to hide things behind the curtain and we spend all of our time making sure we have the story well rehearsed, or we try to spend all of our time hiding it, it frankly just makes things worse. We are tempted with the idea to hide things or to not bring them up, but frankly, trouble is brought about either way. Perhaps you've heard of the story of the old couple and the loaf of bread. When they were young and newly married, this husband would bring home a fresh loaf of bread for his wife. It was still warm to the touch. He picked it right up on the baker's on his way home, and he'd get home, and the first thing he'd do after saying hi to his wife while the loaf of bread is still warm, he would cut off the ends, and he'd put some butter on them and serve them to his wife. And then he would go and do the same for himself. He'd cut off the next slice ends, put some butter on these pieces of bread for himself, and then they'd sit down and eat. They did this for years and years and years. And after 50 years of marriage, 50 years of this happening, the wife says, "Enough, I've had it. Why do you keep giving me not one, but both of the end pieces? Nobody likes the end pieces. Everyone throws them away. Why are you serving them to me? And he looks at her and says, well, I love the end pieces. The ends are my favorite. And I was sacrificing them and giving them to you. If only they had talked about it the very first time that happened. She would not have thought that he was in some way disrespecting her for so long, and he would have known that his act of love in that moment was not being received as an act of love. See, if we create an atmosphere in our marriage where we can be honest and transparent, we have to become good at two things. We have to become good at being vocal with gentleness again, being vocal with what we're feeling. Talk about, hey, you said this and you didn't mean it this way, but this is how I felt, and can we please resolve this together, because I don't want it to happen again. Offense takes place often from our spouse, and it's not even intentional, but if we never talk about it, then we can't fix it for the next time. We have to be vocal with gentleness, and then we have to receive. We have to receive what is being said to us, not take it as a personal attack. And say, you got it, babe. Too much of the time, one or both people in a marriage and a relationship never really talk about how we're feeling about something. And we can get by for a little while, but not for a lifetime. Just as a small cut or scrape can turn into a medical crisis if not cared for or treated, so can the thoughts and feelings that we have inside of us if they are never brought out and talked about. I have learned a lot as a pastor, as a husband, that people are a lot like icebergs. There's a lot on the surface. We see these we see these pictures now. We have a dream one day of getting to go and go to Alaska or up north and see these. But I mean, they're huge. They're enormous pieces of ice in the water. There's a lot that sticks out of the surface, but there is so much more beneath the surface. Friends, the healthiest kind of relationship is when we can bring out what is underneath and bring it to the surface to be talked about. Imagine truthfulness thriving in your relationship where you are honest, and imagine the joy and the peace that comes from that and the trust that is built. The last proverb I want us to lean into is Proverbs chapter 15, verses 31 to 32, and it says this: whoever heeds life-giving correction will be at home among the wise. Those who disregard discipline despise themselves, but the one who heeds correction gains understanding. It's no secret that we aren't perfect. It's no secret that we're flawed. I mean, we get married, right, and then we move in, and there's just like, oh, everything's wonderful, and everything's great. We're in that honeymoon period of just like, it's amazing, it's great, all of this stuff. But then here pretty soon, right, the honeymoon period wears off, and then we have this person who lives with us who just loves to let us know that we're bad at folding laundry, or we're not so great at doing the dishes, or we're not so great at talking to our friends next door. We have this person who lives with us who is just there 24/7 to point out where we are not perfect. Isn't it amazing? But friends, what this is saying, friends, is reality. That it is a blessing that a husband and wife get to be voices of loving correction in each other's life so they can both experience the fullness of being made new by Jesus. This is one of the beautiful reasons why God made marriage. I mean, no other living thing on this entire planet has a marital arrangement like we do. No other living creature on the entire planet does this, just us, because God has given this to us for a very special reason. I mean, even before sin came into the world, I mean, in the first few chapters of Genesis, Before even sin and death and destruction and darkness came into the world, God made Adam and he said, this is great, but this guy is alone and he needs a partner. He needs a teammate. And then God creates Eve, and he, in this moment of recognizing Adam's incompleteness, he says, I know just the thing that will complete him. And then on the flip side, when we let sin and darkness into the world, God still pushes on with this message of what marriage is supposed to be, this beautiful, beautiful relationship, this committed relationship that we have where we get to make each other whole in the sense of pushing each other on to be more of who Jesus is calling us to be. I mean, now there's this darkness, there's this aching hole inside of us that only Christ can care for. Our broken spouse can't care for it. We can't do it for them. We can't fill the void for each other. Christ fills that for us. But in this arrangement, we get to cheer each other on to chase after Christ and grow in our relationship with Him. I mean, that's... In my life, God uses Aaron every day. Every day God uses Aaron to correct Andre in a loving way. And occasionally God uses Andre to correct Aaron. It's not very often. But friends, your spouse is going to be God's primary vessel of loving correction in your life. The New Testament echoes this. That God wants to see a husband and wife be sanctified and made holy in this beautiful relationship that they have. And I encourage you to aim to receive your spouse's loving correction as a nudge from God to grow and mature and aim to give it loving. There's an emphasis there of loving correction. Remember the gentleness we were talking about and the restraint earlier? Loving. And when we talk about in our marriage, we dream about the days of growing old together. Being on the porch in a rocking chair holding a sweet tea or getting to travel or getting to see this or go there. We dream, don't we, of the days of growing old. But perhaps what if even in that we dreamed of maturing together? What if we dreamed of what it would be like for both of us to, in this relationship we have on this side of heaven, experience a sense of God's filling and joy and peace in our life because He's used both of us to grow the other. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? Friends, I don't want us to miss this beautiful reality that it is a blessing that a husband and wife get to be voices of loving correction for each other. A few years ago, I remember Erin came to me and she said she'd love for us to do a devotion together. Perhaps you've had that moment where one or the other, they come and they say, hey, we should do this, or we should do a devotion. We should do this together. And I, of course, this moment is like, absolutely, we can do this. It would be great. Like, let's start talking about what we should do, right? What kind of focus should we do? And then in that moment, Erin is like, oh, I've already got it picked out. I'm like, I feel like you had this planned a little. I feel like this is a little set up in advance. But she had bought us both this book, and one was on wives learning to speak to their husbands, and the other was on husbands speaking to their wives. I took my copy, and it did collect dust for a little while, but then when I saw Erin reading hers, I'm like, oh, I've got to catch up. I can't let her beat me. So I began to dive in. I opened the first chapter, and in the very first sentence, right off the bat, the author writes something that I thought was so ridiculous. I'm like, this can't be right. He writes this, actually. He says, good communication in a marriage is largely the responsibility of the husband. Not solely his, but largely. Meaning a majority of the responsibility of good communication between a husband and wife falls on the shoulders of the husband. I read that, I'm like, nah, I don't like this. I don't, Aaron, what did you buy? I don't like this book. But then I began to read the rest as he became also convincing. Because he uses the examples of Christ going first to allow then his bride, the church, to meet him. He uses what's taught in Ephesians chapter 5, what we talked about last Sunday, this call for us, for husbands, to be like Christ in the same way that Christ loved and gave himself first for the church. And in the same sense, I'm convinced that God expects in the same way that husbands would own the responsibility of communicating first, of going first. Whenever we feel like there's a disconnect or that communication has broken down, when there's misunderstanding, it is our duty to embrace this call to get us on the same page. It doesn't mean that our way is the highway. It doesn't mean that our words are higher or greater or better. It doesn't mean that our ideas are the best ideas, but it's that we would do first. We would be first, be the one who does the hard work of listening and understanding and bringing both parties back to the table to discuss. Because it was Christ, it was Jesus himself that stepped out of heaven, off the throne of heaven, came here into the mud of humanity, also that he could meet us where we were, so we could hear him, understand him, be rescued by him. Friends, would we embody this same conviction from God? Guys, would we embrace that? I'm not perfect in this. But God is growing me in the sense of wanting to be this kind of husband that is like Jesus in his love for his bride. Friends, I shared last week what we'll do as we come to a close every single week. We talked about this statistical reality. That the average divorce rate is 1 in 2 couples. The average divorce rate for couples who go to church together is 1 in 4. It already doubles just by being in church. But the average divorce rate for couples who pray together is 1 in 1,152. I shared that with us last week. And I said, maybe you've been thinking about it all this time and you're like, oh, I forgot. Yes, we have to do that now. Again, we're going to have this moment where we're going to pray with our spouse. Because, friends, I deeply believe God is looking to do a great work in our homes, and it begins here, and it continues on through the rest of the week. And so, friends, just as we did last Sunday, in a moment, I want to encourage you. If you're here with your spouse or you're here with someone you're with, turn, pray with them, ask them, hey, what can I pray for you? And reciprocate the question. Both of you ask each other, and both of you pray over each other. If you're someone who still is kicking the tires of following Jesus, know that God still hears you. It's okay to pray, and even though you're still figuring out if you believe in him or not, he hears you. He's still real whether you think he is or not. But let this be a time where God can bind us to the one that we're with. And if we're here by ourselves, just allow this time where you speak to God and ask him, bring things to him, because you're not alone. You have a great Father in heaven who cares for you. So why don't we go ahead and do this time? Go ahead and turn to your spouse and ask them, what can I pray for you? And we'll take a moment to do that right here.